Hello and welcome. In this video, we are essentially going to look at the age-old question, who am I? And we are going to challenge some fundamental assumptions that many people carry about identities. Afterwards, you will realize that basically nothing that most people include in their concept of self is intrinsic to who they are. Eckhart Tolle's perspective on identity challenges the deeply ingrained but, for most people, unexamined notion that the self is defined by thoughts, memories, beliefs, opinions, interests, tastes, or social roles. He argues that most people live with a false sense of identity, constructed by the mind and reinforced by societal conditioning. This false self is closely tied to the ego, which thrives on attachment, comparison, and fear, keeping individuals trapped in a state of psychological suffering. In Tolle's works, there is no sharp distinction between the ego and the false sense of identity. To awaken from this illusion, Tolle proposes a radical shift in consciousness, detaching from the ego and realizing one's true nature as pure awareness beyond thought. And, in fact, this pure awareness is all that remains constant. Everything else is in a state of movement and change, while giving off the illusion of solidity. Awareness is the only thing that can be said to be real in the deepest sense. The more you are able to detach yourself from this constant movement, of the cycles of cause and effect, and the ego's tendency to build a sense of self through past experiences, the more you will begin to move beyond the level of the intellect and experience yourself as this pure awareness. Apart from opinions, beliefs, etc., people generally define themselves based on external attributes, career, status, personal history, or affiliations. They say, I am a teacher, or I am a mother, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, etc., believing these roles define who they truly are. In the latter cases, the identity also comes with a set of beliefs and opinions, often beliefs and opinions that cause division and animosity. It is furthermore obvious that this tendency has increased over the years. However, as we have seen, these identities are temporary and unstable. A job can be lost, relationships and political opinions can change, and possessions can disappear. Just to name a few examples. It can feel strange and even frightening when it truly starts to sink in that none of what we've come to regard as us has anything to do with who we truly are. It's likely that the mind will start to argue why some labels that we feel a particularly strong attachment to are important to hold on to. But upon honest examination, we realize one label cannot possibly be more real than any other label. This does not mean that the ego will not continue to derive a sense of self from these labels even after we've grasped this. We've practiced viewing ourselves through this lens for a very long time, and it usually takes time for this new perspective to become a permanent lived experience. However, once you've begun to grasp what this is all about, there's no going back. The mind can protest all it wants, but somewhere down the line, surrender is inevitable. For this to really sink in, let's look at how we view the world through the lens of our identities. If we, for example, have built an identity around certain political opinions, our minds will look for information and ideas that support the identity, often exaggerating its significance. We also tend to store such information in the memory much more easily. The opposite is also true with information and ideas that challenge the identity. We ignore it, downplay its significance, and forget about it. We also distort the information we receive to make it fit into our sense of identity. All of this, of course, happens on an unconscious level. To us, this is just how the world is, and we often wonder how other people can be so blind that they don't see what is obvious to us. This is because, in one sense, due to our sense of identity, we live in separate realities. If we want to have a clearer view of the world, other people and ourselves, this is something that we need to start paying attention to. A big problem is that when we feel that we are right and others are wrong, it feels good. This is because the ego is strengthened. When we feel that we've won a discussion or a debate, it gives us a sense of superiority. But have we truly gained anything useful to us? If we want to stop feeding the ego and start seeing ourselves, the world, and other people with clear eyes, we need to start seeing all of these processes for the empty illusions they are. The ego seeks validation and satisfaction. It feeds on identification with thoughts and emotions, reinforcing a separate self-image that must be defended and enhanced. Apart from all of the illusions about who we are, and the perceived need to defend these illusions, this also creates an endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. Even if it's usually not spelled out this clearly, the ego basically says, I will be complete when I achieve this or have that. But as soon as the goal is reached, it finds something else to chase. Because the ego's sense of self depends on external conditions, it remains perpetually unfulfilled. And yes, many of us even build identities around our material belongings. We're usually not aware of this, but if we examine it, we often derive a sense of self from what car we drive, what house we live in, what video game consoles we own, etc., and compare ourselves to others through what we own and they don't, or vice versa. Which leads us to the next point. One of the ego's primary strategies for maintaining itself and its sense of identity is comparison. It defines itself through distinctions: richer or poorer, more or less successful, attractive or unattractive. As we have seen, the need to feel superior fuels competition, judgment, and conflict. Even suffering can be a means for the ego to strengthen itself, as people often derive identity from their struggles. Statements like, I am a victim, I suffer from this or that illness, or I have been through more than others, reinforce the ego's grip. This attachment to suffering, what Tolle calls the pain body, becomes a habitual way of experiencing life. The pain body is suppressed negative emotional energy that gets stored in our bodies. More precisely, it gets stored in our energetic fields, but for most of us, it is felt inside the body, at least in the beginning. After a while, however, as you begin to break your identification with the body and brain, you will start to have more and more experiences of yourself as pure awareness. Then you will also start experiencing that this energy is not limited to the physical body. It thrives on negative experiences, drawing individuals into familiar patterns of pain. When triggered, the pain body seeks out situations that reinforce suffering, feeding off the energy of conflict. This explains why some people are drawn to drama or repeat harmful relationship patterns. They are unconsciously reinforcing an identity based on pain. Tolle suggests that to transcend the pain body, one must become aware of it without identifying with it. By observing emotional reactions without attachment, individuals can break free from cycles of suffering. What needs to be realized fully is that, in this case, we actually derive a sense of identity from a semi-autonomous field of negative emotional energy that wants nothing other than to strengthen itself through our negative emotional reactions. Beyond the personal ego, Tolle explores the collective ego, the broader societal patterns that shape human identity. As discussed in the beginning, group affiliations, whether based on nationality, religion, or ideology, often become extensions of the ego. People define themselves through their group, seeing those outside it as adversaries. This collective identification has led to division, prejudice, and war. Tolle argues that humanity's history of conflict is largely a manifestation of the collective ego's need to assert superiority and to build a sense of self based on what it perceives itself to be different from. True peace, he suggests, arises only when individuals transcend identity-based thinking and recognize their shared essence beyond form. The key to accessing this deeper self is mindfulness, bringing full attention to the present moment. As we have seen, the ego thrives on the past and future, weaving narratives of regret or anxiety to sustain itself. It tells stories of what was or what should be, keeping individuals trapped in mental noise. By focusing on the now, one disrupts this cycle. When attention is fully in the present, thoughts lose their hold, and a deeper sense of identity emerges. This presence is not something to be achieved in the future. It is always available, waiting to be noticed. This bears repeating. Awareness is not something to be achieved. It is there all the time. We just don't pay attention to it because we are caught up in all of this activity that creates this illusory sense of self. You will notice a very real, tangible shift once you access this state. There is a sense of calm detachment, and you are, for a moment, not as caught up in the mental noise inside your head. You are suddenly acutely aware of being here, observing whatever is going on in the present moment, and you may also feel an expansion of your awareness. In the beginning, this will only last for a second or so, but the more you can train yourself to bring your attention back to the present moment, the more you will catch glimpses of this state. As stated in the beginning, according to Tolle, once this has begun, there's no going back, but the process is individual to each and every one of us, as we all have different amounts of negative emotional energy stored in our energetic field, and therefore different amounts of inner resistance to let go of. Every time resistance is triggered, unless we remain aware, we will get caught in unconscious reactive thoughts and behavior. Tolle emphasizes that awakening is not about acquiring new knowledge, but about unlearning false identities. The mind will resist this, as it fears the dissolution of the ego. This, of course, happens more subtly than an outspoken fear of losing the ego. Many can say that they want to get out of the ego's grip, but then get triggered when they feel that their ego identity is challenged in some way. In this, it's important to clearly understand the difference between intellectual and applied knowledge. However, as stated previously, once this process has started, it can only progress, even if it doesn't always seem that way. Moments of stillness become more frequent, and a new sense of self begins to emerge. One not based on concepts, but on direct experience of existence. Surrender plays a crucial role in this transformation. Surrender, in Tolle's terms, does not mean giving up, but rather accepting the present moment fully. The ego resists what is, constantly arguing that life should be different. This resistance creates suffering. When one stops resisting reality, the mind quiets, and a profound sense of peace arises. In this state, actions become aligned with life's natural flow, rather than driven by fear or desire. A common misconception is that losing egoic identity leads to passivity or detachment from the world. Tolle counters this by explaining that true presence enhances engagement with life. When free from egoic distortions, interactions become more authentic, creativity flourishes, and relationships deepen. Without the need to prove oneself, people connect with others on a deeper level, free from judgment and expectation. Work and creativity are no longer driven by insecurity, but arise naturally from a place of stillness. Tolle also addresses the fear of non-existence, which underlies much of the ego's clinging. The thought, "Who am I without my identity?" can evoke anxiety. However, he reassures that losing attachment to the ego does not mean losing oneself. It means discovering a self that is infinitely greater than any mental concept. Rather than annihilation, it is liberation from a false self that was never real to begin with. Ultimately, Tolle's view on identity is a call to wake up from the dream of mind-made selfhood. By stepping out of identification with thought, emotion, and social roles, individuals can uncover a presence that is vast, peaceful, and free. This realization is not an abstract theory, but a direct experience available to anyone willing to observe their mind without attachment. As more people awaken to this truth, the collective consciousness shifts, leading to a world less driven by ego and more aligned with awareness, compassion, and genuine connection. In summary, Eckhart Tolle challenges conventional notions of identity by distinguishing between the egoic self and a deeper essence. He argues that the ego, shaped by past experiences and societal roles, creates an illusory identity rooted in fear and attachment. This leads to suffering and a false sense of separation. Tolle emphasizes presence as the key to transcending the ego, allowing individuals to access a state of peace beyond thought. He highlights how the collective ego fuels societal dysfunction and how surrendering to the present moment dissolves resistance. Through mindfulness and self-observation, one can move beyond limiting identities and connect with a deeper, unshakable sense of being. In this, it's important to understand what we are talking about and what we are not talking about. It is the attachment and identification with the identity, not the identity itself, that is the problem. You may still continue as you always have in the world, choose something completely different, or nothing at all. But you know that, at your core, you are no longer this person that you've been identifying with, and thus, you don't have to defend this false sense of self. This means that you can start breaking free from this false sense of separation that this artificial otherness creates between you and other people. This is a very important step, to see through all that which you and others build identities around that cause separation, and instead work toward unity. This is not always easy, as the tendency inside us to make ourselves right and others wrong is so ingrained and strong that we often fall for it without thinking. Try not to judge yourself when you notice this happening. It's a natural part of the process. Just see it for what it is and gently bring your awareness back to the present moment. Do this over and over again until the false sense of self starts to fade into the background, and pure awareness more and more becomes your default state. Finally, we have videos about both the pain body and the ego, as understood by Eckhart Tolle, as well as a playlist with all our videos about his teachings. There are links to them on the end screen that you can see now.
You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.